Detours. Brought to you by Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. For a guy who's reached Hall of Fame status in both wheelchair tennis and rugby, Rick Draney remains humble and respected by all those who have played and worked side by side with him. Close friend and national director of Wheelchair Tennis USA, Jason Harnett, refers to Draney in the highest regard, describing him as loyal, pioneering, consistent, and always willing to give back. Instrumental in the development of the quad division both nationally and internationally, Rick compiled 127 victories on the court and, to boot, earned a gold medal in rugby at the Paralympics in Sydney 2000. Welcome, Rick. Must feel pretty good to hear someone use those words to describe you, huh?
Thanks, Bob. It's good to be here. And yes, flattered, but also humbled. And now I've got the pressure of trying to live up to those words.
Well, I think you already lived up to it, Rick. You've had a heck of an athletic career. You and I go way back. I can remember those days all the way back in Irvine and then in San Diego at Barnes. And wow, you've been through the whole developmental era and stage of the sport. What do you when you look back? I mean, just jumping in. When you look back on that era? What do you remember most?
I think the one thing that stands out the most is what an opportunity I felt I had as a Southern Californian, with the NFWT being right there in Orange County and with wheelchair rugby as it started to grow in popularity and gain traction. We had a lot of teams. And so there were a lot of practice opportunities, a lot of competition opportunities, a lot of interaction and association opportunities, and just everything that we needed to develop skills to pursue those two sports, especially tennis for me, to the level and degree that we wanted to. The path was out in front of us and the opportunities were there. And so thanks to those and everybody who created those opportunities and provided everything that was in place for us to be able to do what we got to do as athletes and competitors, I think really helped me being in that environment.
Well, geez, man, you go all the way back to '84. You were playing up there at Saddleback with the legends and the godfather of tennis, as we know him, Brad Parks, and and many others. But you guys were just getting going. Your equipment is so archaic. You're literally trying to figure out how to make this game work for a wheelchair.
Yeah, and that was, I was a few years after it really did start. And in those very early years, I've read the stories and talked to Brad and others about a lot of guys were in the standard hospital type wheelchairs in the very early years. It wasn't until manufacturers started developing some lighter weight, sport minded chairs that started making a huge difference. As the technology progressed, it allowed the athletic abilities and skills of the individuals to shine more as opposed to being maybe limited or even restricted by the equipment we had at the time. So that was a huge thing that I think changed the dynamic and the trajectory. And of course, the chairs have evolved over time, like all things do, to look at them now and what they're able to do. It almost makes you wish you were younger and got to play with the equipment they had today and see what would be possible.
Well, change always comes slowly, and I know you know this. I'm only preaching to the choir, but back then, Quickie was kind of at the top of their game. They were revolutionizing chairs and making them much better than they had ever been before. But the change was actually at that point in time was subtle still. All they really did was put a lot of camber in a box frame chair.
Yeah, but it was amazing what those few degrees of camber did, as
Turning.
far as turning and a little bit more stability. I can remember still just traveling with one chair. Nobody thought about having an everyday chair and a sports chair, but you had to think about, okay, how much camber can I put in? Nobody knew to go to 16 or 18 or 20 degrees back then. We thought it was too much, but you didn't want your chair that you traveled with and competed with to be so wide that you couldn't get through doorways and have issues like that. So it was a little bit of a hybrid. And I think back now and think, how in the world did we ever even play without an anti-tip in the back? and
Oh,
compete.
exactly, Rick. And, I hate that we're getting ahead of ourselves, but, as long as we're on the topic, it's insane when you see the amount of camber and the anti-tips and the two rollerblade wheels on the front. It opens the door to harder hitting, harder serves, just so much more security in terms of everything you can do maneuverability wise out on the court.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun, I think, to be maybe a part of that process through that evolutionary process. And again, a standard chair with no anti-tip, anti-tip starts being incorporated. A three-wheeler for a while with a single longer tube out front instead of two casters, and then back.
And that alone just blew us away, right?
Yeah, it was always, and just like again any sport, whether it's automobile racing, football, basketball, tennis, whatever it is, racket technology changed, string technology changed, all those types of things added to the experience and the opportunities, the possibilities, and the accomplishments to where just like in eras of able-bodied tennis, you look at the past, what they did. I mean, the attire that they wore compared to what they wear now, the tennis shoes and what they wore, and how sturdy were they, and how much stability did they provide as they were moving around the court. I mean, go clear back, and women in long skirts and men in slacks and ties and things like that, restricted by their movement. So that is the amazing thing to me, is how much more liberating and freeing the equipment is in wheelchair tennis, that really almost makes the equipment disappear and the athlete shine front and center as they compete and do what they do.
So you basically start up in '84, and it takes the better part of 10 years for the ITF, the International Tennis Federation, to really recognize the quad division as it was. What was the battle over that decade-long battle? What did it look like, and what did it take to convince them that there was a legitimacy behind having a quad division?
And that's an interesting dynamic. I know Brad from the very beginning wanted to make wheelchair tennis as inclusive as possible, from opportunities and varying abilities, and those types of things. And so all of the divisions that we had in the States, including a quad division, were something that were there from the beginning. So it was always included, always embraced. I know from an ITF standpoint, one of the concerns early on was about the numbers of individuals competing. We need more numbers. We can't have the same status and recognition for a division when there might only be 25 or 30, when we have hundreds in the men's rankings and the women's rankings. And I understand that. And so it was just an advocation process of, what do we need to do to make you willing to look at this and consider this? And at the same time, what can we do as athletes to try to get more players participating and competing? And so some of the efforts, again, clear back in the early 80s, there weren't a lot of international players playing wheelchair tennis. So it grew as well. They had no wheelchair tennis internationally for a while. And then they started with what they felt they were comfortable with, and they continued to explore possibilities and expand from there. So I don't think it was ever, I wouldn't call it ever a resistance. It may have been a hesitation, but they had their metrics and their priorities, and the guidance that they wanted before they felt that that was included. A lot of it was that they felt wheelchair tennis the more closely, and this is my opinion. You'd have to ask them directly, but I guess maybe more my impression was that from their standpoint, they partly were trying to make wheelchair tennis as similar to able-bodied tennis as possible at the highest levels. So just like able-bodied tennis has a men's division and a women's division, it made sense to them, with everything else that the ITF oversees and manages, all the other tours that they manage, that let's do the same thing for wheelchair tennis. We're going to have a men's division and a women's division. Their focus, their priority initially was not trying to have as many divisions as possible. It was about focusing on more of that elite level athlete, and that was, again, that was their initial approach. They modified, they adjusted that over the years.
So what do you think then was the pivotal moment where they saw value and allowed it in and allowed quads in as an
Uh,
official division?
They probably got tired of listening to me. Since I started, I was always once I was a quad and in the quad division, that was kind of always my hope, my dream, my goal, my wish was to see us have the opportunities internationally, just as the men players and the women's players. And so I kinda started advocating for that and started the conversations, and there were others. I mean, we would talk at tournaments and things like that, but it seemed like more often than not, maybe I was the one that would have the conversations. But we were trying to get, a quad division in the Paralympics since '92, and early on, it was, "No, we're just not ready. We're not there." So it took, 8 years for that to happen, 12 years for that to happen. 8 years, I think when rugby finally got officially recognized, that maybe helped them recognize that, okay, there are legitimate quad athletes and there are enough of them around the world. Let's consider this. So again, advocacy, as we tried, and that was the other thing that I felt very fortunate about was living in Southern California, and, you mentioned Brad before and other athletes that were down there, going to tournaments, going to practices at Saddleback College, going to camps and clinics through the PVA, whatever it was, I had the opportunity to watch some of the best in the world, and so I'm not saying that the quad athletes before me or early on were any less serious about wanting to compete, but I was trying to emulate what the elite level athletes were doing in every way, shape, and form on the court and off the court. So trying to elevate my training, trying to elevate the way I played the game, the way I hit a shot, the way I moved, I was trying to mimic and model what they were doing as opposed to just thinking, well, I know I don't have as much physical function as they do, so there are some things I'm just not going to work on. I thought it was important to try to do that. And so I think as we elevated, and this was others as well, as we elevated the level of competition, and as some of these international players started recognizing the opportunities, at least in the States, and some of the early adoption in other countries, as they saw those opportunities present themselves, it was something they wanted to get involved with. And so then that momentum and that growth became maybe a little bit more organic, that as you created something and as people were advocating for that, and as those opportunities were becoming available, more people became interested. And then we got the numbers and the level of play, the quality of play, those types of things where the International Tennis Federation recognized that, you know what? We need to take this more seriously than we have in the past as far as recognizing this division.
We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Sports and Spokes Magazine. For nearly 50 years, they've produced stories on iconic athletes performing at the top of their game, given generational coverage of sports dating back to the 1970s, and they've shown the way with exciting and timeless magazine cover shots. To stay on top of all the latest news from the world of high performance adaptive sports, go to sportsandspokes.com. Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. Hey, Rick, that's a perfect segue into the quad challenges. So, you guys, you do have some unique challenges: limited grip and hand function, maneuverability of chair, trunk support, all those things. It seems to me that whereas maybe some of the paras like the David Halls and the Esther Vergeers, they can play a big power game. It seems the quads have to play a much smarter, more strategic kind of game.
I would say yes. I guess the adage, you got to play smarter, not harder kind of thing. We, just like anybody, we've got to try to understand what our limitations are, what our realities are. We've got to test those limits and figure out what's possible. We have to look at the equipment. What can I do with my chair setup? What can I do with the way that I strap myself in the chair that's going to secure me and stabilize me as much as possible so that I can get every bit of function and performance out of myself given those limitations. I often kind of kid around. It's like, oh man, if I had Esther's function or David's function, I'd like to go play them and just see what would happen, kind of thing, or vice versa. If they had the same level of injury as me, what would that competition be like? Just for fun. But reality is reality. And so we have to look at that. But there was no reason that And again, I don't want to say that we settled for anything, but I don't think some of the early quads really thought about how far can we push this and how far can we test this, just like the men and the women today. I mean, again, the athletes today compared to the athletes 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, it's night and day difference as far as what they do. And the function may have been a little bit different. We just didn't realize what was possible. And again, as we talked, some of the equipment held us back a little bit and didn't allow for that. And you mentioned one thing about the securing the racket in their hand. There were
Yeah, I want let me jump in really quick here, Rick, because that was, something that you brought to the table more than anybody else, which was your technique of taping or securing your racket to your hand. Uh, that was just a monstrous difference. That shot you off into a different spectrum.
Yeah, and I had no idea what I was doing early on. I actually, when I first even toyed with the thought about this, I thought, well, how in the world? I'm barely still working on getting around and getting through the day. How can I think about being athletic again? But I talked to it was Dan Lockman. We were in a class at a junior college together. I went back to school after my injury, and so we were sitting next to each other because it was an area where they had seating that would work for us, and started talking a little bit, and he's the one that told me about the class at Saddleback, and he says, "Well, if you're ever interested, come on out. There's a bunch of guys, and, everybody'd be happy to help and see what they can do." And I thought, well, I'm not going to go and just flat out embarrass myself. So I called a good friend of mine up and said, "Hey, will you go out on a tennis court with me? I'm just going to grab an ace bandage and a roll of athletic tape because I don't know what else to do at this time." And so we went out there and he didn't know what he was doing and I didn't know what I was doing. And we tried a couple of things and I just couldn't get it quite tight enough. I didn't want to put the tape right on my hand initially because I thought that was going to be too uncomfortable. So he got on one side of the net, I'm on the other, and he's trying to hit balls to me, and I can't move because the ace bandage and the little bit of tape I used is slick, and I'm yelling at him, "Well, you gotta hit it to me," and he's yelling at me, "Well, I'm not a tennis player," and so I said, "Well, just toss a few to me and see if I can hit it," and I swung. I had to hit it dead center, which again is what we wanna do all the time, but if I didn't, the racket wasn't secure enough in my hand, it would start to twist. And so I said, "All right, that's enough." I remember leaving and thinking, "Why in the world did I do this? It's just not possible." And I dismissed it. I thought that was almost like a waste of my time. I wish I hadn't have tried that. It was just that frustrating. And yet, being, I guess, stubborn and whatever else, as my strength improved a little bit and I got my first lighter weight sports type chair as opposed to the standard hospital chair I was discharged with, that changed as far as my mobility to where I thought, well, if I can move a little better, that'll help a lot. And so I got willing again to say, well, let's go explore this. And so I went to the class at Saddleback College, and Ron Hastings was the coach there at the time. And again, very gracious to say, okay, I know there are a few quad players playing and they do things a little bit differently, but let's see what we can do. And so we started experimenting and it's like, well, pull the ace bandage a little bit tighter and that'll help. And let's tape it a little bit more and that will help. And so I could get out and hit a few balls in the drills, but again, my hand was still slipping quite a bit on the push rim. And so one day, and I can't remember, how far it was in between those types of things, but one day I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get rid of the ace bandage because that's a problem. And let me see if I can try to tape my hand directly. And it hurts a lot and sticking to the hair here, and that's pinching there. And so that was an evolutionary process to start finding what's more comfortable, what's more consistent, what are the pressure points. Greg Thompson used a molded orthotic device that was formed around his hand, attached to his racket. I tried that and I couldn't get comfortable with that. So after time, I got more comfortable with my taping method, but I was still slipping too much, sliding too much, didn't have good contact. And one day, an aha moment, desperation, inspiration, whatever you want to call it, I thought, why don't I turn the tape out after I've taped my hand in the racket and retape my hand in my pattern with the sticky side out? So now I've got the adhesive from the roll of tape coming into contact with my hand rims. And that was the difference maker for me that made it, okay, now mobility is not really the issue. Now I can get back to being focused on an athlete and see what I can actually accomplish.
Were you pretty sharing about your ideas?
Once I figured that out, it wasn't anything that I wanted to make a secret. Again, there weren't a lot of players early on, but as we did camps and clinics in the States, they would invite me as a quad player. And at the time, I'd had some success and accomplishments. And so I would go and I would show anytime we had quads, and I would show other coaches just so they could see what I was doing, so that if they crossed paths with somebody back home, they'd have that concept. I had the opportunity to do some things with the International Tennis Federation as well. And again, would show and share that. And Rich Jane knows very well that at one point in time, the ITF asked me about putting a video together, an instructional video. And that's one of the things that we did, is try to show all of those things. And we had several individuals show their taping method, because everybody has a little bit of a variation of what worked for them. So we were trying. Again, as you talked earlier about the growth, I wanted as many players playing as possible. So
Undoubtedly.
if this works, let's do it for as many people as it helps.
Right. Hey, Rick, I'm going to jump ahead to another sport that you were quite successful at, which was rugby. Once again, you come in and you're basically, I mean, it's not exactly the pioneering days. We all know it went back to Canada back in the late 80s, but nonetheless, you were still on the fringe of that sport growing. So you come in, you do quite well. Sharp Shadow becomes a dominant team right away. You're playing as a 2.5, so you're an integral player who gets a lot of time on the court, and you work your way all the way up to the national rugby team. You earn a gold medal in rugby in Sydney 2000. That must have been another extraordinary moment in your athletic career.
It was something I never even thought about, to be honest. I really enjoyed tennis, and I never thought about rugby. I had heard about it a little bit, and again, kind of like with Dan Lockman telling me about tennis, as I'd go to these tournaments, there were a few other guys that were playing wheelchair rugby as well, and they said, "Hey, you ought to play this." And I thought, I like tennis so much, and this is my sport, and I don't want to take time away and those types of things. But I thought, well, why not? The seasons kind of offset. Tennis was kind of spring to fall, and rugby was kind of fall to spring. And so got involved a little bit and quite enjoyed it. It had a different dynamic as a team sport versus mostly an individual sport in tennis. The dynamics on the court, some of the mobility, cross training, all of the things, strategies, those types of things. Some of my tennis background I felt helped me in rugby, and I think some of the rugby background helped in my tennis. So yeah, I got to the point where I embraced both of them. And the success in rugby was mostly because tennis for the quad division was not where I had wanted or hoped it would be earlier on. So if I wanted to compete at certain levels, rugby was the pathway. They were a demonstration sport in 96 and a full medal sport in 2000. And I was still, again, advocating for quad division to be in the Paralympics since 92. And every time we got passed over, so to speak, it was like, well, I'll pursue the opportunities in rugby. I tried out for the 96 team and did not make it. And so I tried out again for 2000 and qualified for that. And so, yeah, that whole storybook of rugby, of never thinking about playing that sport to begin with, to then being up on the podium and having a gold medal draped around my neck along with all the teammates, was something that was just added to everything that I was accomplishing or wanted to try to accomplish in tennis. And then it's what we did as a club team with our original 6 members and the guys that we added as Sharp Shadow, 3 national championships in a row, in a formidable team for many, many years, and that camaraderie and all of those dynamics, those types of things. It was just another facet that I didn't imagine or think about, but boy, I sure am glad that I had the opportunities.
Rick, great history, great stories. Wish we could sit here and talk for 2 hours about all this, but man, you are a legend. You've done some historical and some very forward-thinking, trailblazing things for our adaptive world. And thanks so much, man. It was a great talk.
Good to visit with you, Bob. Thank you very much.